Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to a deep dive into the world of Lex Fridman. You might know him as a podcaster and interviewer who's really been gaining some attention in the media. He's got a huge online presence, millions of followers across YouTube and Instagram and X, which used to be Twitter. But what really sets Fridman apart, I think, in the current media landscape is his dedication to these long-form interviews. He really dives into complex topics with his guests, engages with them on this intellectual and empathetic level, instead of just going for, those quick sound bites that you see so much of these days.
Yeah, and to get a real sense of his approach, I think it helps to understand his background a bit. So Fridman was born in 1986 in the Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic. He actually lived in Moscow for a while before his family moved to the U.S. in 1997. And, this move combined with his Ukrainian Jewish heritage, his father was born in Kyiv and his grandmother is from Kharkiv. It's all really shaped his worldview, especially when it comes to the war that's going on in Ukraine now.
Right, and his academic background adds another layer to his work, too. He's got a PhD in artificial intelligence from Drexel University, and he's made some important contributions to the field of robotics and machine learning.
Exactly.
So Fridman's work really covers a lot of different themes, but one of his main focuses is on technology, particularly artificial intelligence. He's always exploring the ethical implications of AI and how all of these technological advances are affecting humanity. If you want to get a sense of how he approaches this, you should check out his interviews with some of the big names in tech, people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, but it's not all just about the technical side of things. Fridman also gets into philosophy and ethics. He tackles these big questions about the meaning of life, morality, and purpose. And he has some great conversations with thinkers like Sam Harris and David Chalmers, where they discuss things like free will and consciousness, and even the potential role of AI in ethical decision-making. These discussions really push you to think outside the box and consider different perspectives on really complex philosophical ideas.
Yeah, and he certainly doesn't shy away from politics or conflict or even history for that matter. I mean, he's interviewed political leaders like Bernie Sanders and really delved into these complicated dynamics of government and power and human conflict. His podcast is almost like a platform for bridging those gaps between different ideologies and starting conversations about some really contentious topics.
And to really help people understand the historical context that shapes what's going on in the world today, he often brings in historians like Serhii Plokhy, an expert on Ukraine, to sort of illuminate the past and how it connects to the present. This multifaceted approach that he takes, I think, really helps his audience develop a much deeper understanding of all the different forces that are shaping the world.
Absolutely. One of the things that really stands out to me about Fridman is his interviewing style. It's really empathetic and genuinely curious. It feels like he creates this space where guests can actually open up and share their thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, he doesn't go for these confrontational debates. He chooses this much more thoughtful kind of inquiry. He's trying to understand the motivations and perspectives of his guests. And this empathy that he brings really humanizes those he interviews. And I think it allows the audience to connect with them on a much more personal level. Another key aspect of Fridman's approach is that he really takes preparation seriously. He's a big believer in doing your homework. He says that to have really meaningful interviews, you need to have a deep understanding of your guest's background and their work and their ideas. And he often talks about spending, hours studying his guests' writings and speeches and all the relevant historical context. And it's this dedication to preparation that allows him to ask these really insightful questions and pushes guests to, elaborate on their ideas and really engage in these substantive conversations.
Yeah, and his commitment to asking those tough questions is pretty evident in the way he talks about other journalists. He feels like a lot of them just kind of resort to these surface-level questions, especially when they're interviewing people in positions of power. He said before that he believes in holding people accountable, regardless of their status. And he sees these really in-depth interviews as a way to get past those superficial answers and really dig into the nuances of complex issues.
Yeah, for sure. And this dedication to depth and nuance is also clear in the wide range of guests that he has on his podcast. You see everyone from political figures like Bernie Sanders to these tech giants like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg to cultural icons like Kanye West. It's really a broad spectrum of fields and perspectives. And this really eclectic mix of guests highlights his desire to explore a really wide range of ideas and talk to people who are shaping the world in all these different ways.
Definitely. But it's interesting. It's Fridman's stated interest in interviewing these really controversial figures, particularly Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, that has caused a lot of debate. He makes the argument that to really understand figures like this, to really inform public discourse, you have to engage with them. He thinks that by talking to them directly, you can actually gain some insights into their motivations and their decision-making processes. He's even drawn a parallel to the historical value of those interviews with someone like Adolf Hitler, suggesting that by studying people like this, we can learn valuable lessons about, leadership and power, and even the dangers of ideology.
Right. And while Fridman does acknowledge the ethical complexities that are inherent in giving a platform to controversial leaders, he's always stressing the importance of rigorous preparation and really direct questioning.
Right.
He believes that you can avoid unintentionally legitimizing their actions by asking tough, well-prepared questions. And he actually distinguishes his approach from people like Tucker Carlson, whose interactions with Putin he's actually criticized for lacking depth and critical engagement. He sees that Carlson interview with Putin as a kind of a cautionary tale. It shows the dangers of giving uncritical access to these kinds of figures, because essentially it allows them to just deliver these prepared talking points without any real challenge or scrutiny.
And then you have this other layer of complexity with Fridman's work, which is his visit to the front lines of the war in Ukraine in 2023. During that trip, he actually interviewed a bunch of people who were impacted by the conflict: military leaders, soldiers, civilians. And these conversations were really about capturing the human cost of war. They explored themes of resilience and those moral dilemmas that people face, and the psychological toll of being in conflict. Fridman's goal was to offer a perspective that went beyond, that traditional war reporting, and instead focused on those personal stories and those lived experiences of the people who were directly affected by the fighting.
And yet, despite a lot of public interest, those interviews are still unreleased. And it's really led to a lot of speculation about why Fridman decided to hold back on them. Some people think maybe the content was just too sensitive, or, could potentially do harm if it was released without some really careful consideration. Others have suggested that there might be some editorial challenges, in trying to present such emotionally charged material. But whatever the reason, Fridman hasn't really said anything about it publicly, which has only fueled further speculation. I think a lot of people are wondering about his editorial process and what kinds of things might influence the choices that he makes.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Well, this upcoming interview with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is a pretty unique opportunity to maybe address some of those unanswered questions. I would imagine that their conversation is going to touch upon the ongoing conflict, the challenges of trying to lead during a time of war, and the broader geopolitical implications of everything that's happening. It'll be really interesting to see if Fridman uses this as a chance to kind of explain his own perspective on the war, and maybe clarify his decision to hold back on releasing those interviews that he did on the Ukrainian front lines.
It's definitely going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds. Fridman's work, and especially his focus on engaging with those more controversial figures, it raises some really fundamental ethical questions about the role of media in a world that's so divided. How do we balance that need for understanding with the risks that come with potentially legitimizing harmful ideologies? Can you really engage in meaningful dialogue with people who have been accused of doing really bad things without running the risk of giving their narratives more weight than they should have? These are tough questions with no easy answers. And honestly, Fridman's approach has been met with a mix of both praise and criticism.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. On the one hand, you have his supporters. They admire his willingness to tackle those really difficult conversations. They see it as essential for promoting understanding and challenging those preconceived notions that we all have. But then on the other hand, you have his critics. They're concerned about the possibility of normalizing really harmful views, especially when you're dealing with individuals who have been accused of human rights abuses. It's a really tricky balance to strike.
It really is. And, other interviewers who have also had to deal with similar dilemmas when they were interviewing controversial figures. Think about Christiane Amanpour, for example. She's gotten a lot of praise for her direct and probing questions when interviewing leaders like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran. She really shows how important it is to ask those tough questions in order to challenge those narratives and hold people accountable. And then you have those famous David Frost interviews with Richard Nixon after the whole Watergate scandal. Those really highlighted that very delicate balance between allowing someone to explain their actions, but also making sure that they're held accountable for the things that they've done wrong.
Right. It's about finding that balance. So Fridman, like those other interviewers, he gets that it's crucial to really be prepared and to ask those challenging questions when you're engaging with these controversial figures. But what sets his approach apart is that he also brings this sense of empathy to the table. He really wants to understand the motivations and the perspectives of his guests, even those that he might personally disagree with. I think that's what makes his work so compelling.
Yeah, I agree with that. And at the end of the day, Lex Fridman has really created this unique space for himself in the media landscape. His long-form interviews, which are so full of intellectual depth and empathy, they've attracted a huge audience. And his willingness to tackle these really complex and often controversial topics has really sparked some crucial debates about the role of media in a world that's so polarized.
Absolutely. So I guess the question that Fridman's work keeps bringing us back to is this. Can we truly understand someone like Vladimir Putin without actually engaging with him directly? Or does that kind of engagement automatically run the risk of legitimizing his actions? It's not an easy question to answer, and I think it's one that we're going to keep grappling with as we move forward.
I think you're right about that. It's definitely a question worth pondering.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of Lex Fridman. As always, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.